Alone, desperate, forgotten, unloved. Where in the only words that little Draken could think of right now? Sitting alone with a little bit of light peering through the cracked closet door, he felt a shiver run down his body as he rubbed his arms to keep himself warm. In the distance, he heard Shigo try to play cool and help his mother down for dinner, quickly thinking of a way to get him back to normal. Draken never liked the small and squeezed places. "Hurry up, Shigo! Please just hurry!" he fought as he slowly rolled back and forth. Shigo was giving Mom Miss Lipsky some steak and sat down nervously and started to eat herself. "Shigo, do you know where Drew is?" Abby asked, putting down her fork. "Drew?" Shigo asked nervously. She was hoping that Draken was hearing a bit of what she had just said because she would be down soon. "Yes, Drew?" Abby asked, if there was something wrong. "Well, you see, Miss Lipsky, your own son has found a scroll a little while ago, and we found it behind a bookcase." "And this has to explain why he hasn't ate dinner?" Abby asked, confused. "Actually, yes, it does. Now, what I was saying is your son made a formula a while ago to change his body, and he drank it back to the body of a preschooler. Now this afternoon." "A preschooler?" Abby said, interrupting Shigo for the second time. And Shigo didn't like it when people interrupt her. But she kept her cool this time. "Yes, a preschooler. Now this afternoon he used the formula again to go through in the walls and see if he could find anything else. We found this mysterious scroll, and well, we have a dog, as you know, and apparently our dog, Commodore Puddles, has gone into where Drew's formula is kept and broke the beakers, which had the formula change him back. And now he's stuck in a preschool-like body," Shigo said, finishing her twisted napkin very nervously. Abby's eyes were big and wide, and while her smile was almost like a dot. Did you say that he's in a body when he was a preschooler?" she asked, stunned. Yes, that's right," Shigo said, letting out a deep breath. "I think I might have to lie down." "No, I want to see my son," Abby said, putting her hand on her forehead. Draken had heard everything that had been said so far, and was afraid of his mother's heart was going to give out. "I'm such an idiot. I could have waited until she went home to screw around with my changing my body, but no," he thought angrily, scolding himself. "All right, this might be a shock to you. Drew," Shigo then called, biting her lower lip. Little Draken then took a deep breath and walked out of the closet. Abby's eyes were flashing, just hoping that it was a joke and it wasn't true. But little did she know is that she was going to see her son in a body that she hadn't seen him in a very long time. Stepping into the doorway, Draken held his breath and closed his eyes, small, scrawny, with his black hair messed up, and braced himself to hear his poor mother scream. Abby stood in shock as she saw the small boy she once knew. Standing before her was a boy with black wavy hair and diamond beetle-like eyes. Standing before her was a boy she would comfort when he was sick or scared when he was little. And standing before her was her son when he was at the age of 4. Shigo's heart was pounding rather fast, and through the silence that was going on, so she could hear it pounded very loudly. "Don't faint," Shigo fought, bracing herself to catch poor Abby, who was in the white as a chalk, and was staring at her son as if she just met him. Hey, Mom," Draken said nervously, waving his little small pale hand. Abby then started to breathe heavily as her beady eyes looked at him from the tip of his hair to the top of his head to the soles of his shoes. "Drew?" she whispered quietly as he smiled kindly. Then Abby's eyes started to roll back, and Draken was getting nervous. Mom, don't!" His voice trailed off as helpless as Abby fell to the ground with her eyes closed. Shigo was afraid of this and ran to her side to check to see if she was still breathing. "Mom!" Draken screamed at the top of his lungs as he ran to helpless mother's side and brushed that hair out of her face. "I knew this would happen," Shigo said in a worried voice, standing up and running to get a wet cloth. "Will she be okay?" Draken asked in a panicked voice. Yes, I think so. She just fainted, that's all," Shigo said, kneeling back down and helping her sit up a bit. Abby's face was flushed and ice cold, and Draken prayed that she had just fainted. Shigo then wringed the cool water out of Abby's face, and Draken fanned her a bit. Come on, Mom, wake up! Please! Draken fought as he ran his little fingers through the side of her face. If something were ever to happen to his mother, all because of him, he would never forgive himself. Slowly starting to stir, Abby's eyes cracked open as she looked around the room. Draken let out a small, deep breath of relief and sat back against the chair wall. Shigo had helped Abby up, and they were both just looking down at Draken. What? He said, raising an eyebrow. What did you do to yourself? Abby asked, in a small voice glaring down at him. Bad experiment? He said quickly, feeling bad about what he just did. I don't believe it, Abby said, feeling like she was going to faint again, so she grabbed the small chair arms for support. Please forgive me, Mama, Drew said, starting to plead. You're just like him. Experiments all the time. First they were fine and then it happened again. Mom, now, this is not the time, Drew said, standing up, then letting out a deep breath as Abby closed her eyes and looked down. I'm sorry, I'll never hurt you again, Drew then said, as his little face started to well up with tears, and he ran out of the room in tears. Drew, wait, Shigo said, as she started out of the room, but Abby stopped her. I'm sorry if I fainted. Please don't be upset with him, Abby said, biting her lower lip. Shigo looked down and nodded. Maybe he just needs his mother this time, she said, then smiling at Abby, who kindly smiled back, and then she headed upstairs to see her son. Draken had ran into his bedroom, and he opened the closet doors. He wasn't scared of the dark like he was when he was young. This time he just ran angrily and crawled in back, cuddling up with his cut-up legs, and winced as he touched his cuts, but then dug his fingers into them because he knew he deserved to be punished. Tears of sadness and anger ran down his face as he rested his head against the wall in the dark. Abby slowly walked up to the stairs, breathing. I wonder where he went, Abby then thought, as she checked each bedroom, until she came upon Draken and Shigo's room. Walking, she smiled and looked around. I'm so happy Drew has a wonderful wife, she thought, as she was just about to leave when she heard little sniffles coming from his closet. She knew it was her son. Drew, it's Mommy. Please come out, she asked, sitting on the bed and looking at the dark closet. No, I don't want to hurt you again, but please, he said, crying a bit, rubbing his sore eyes. You never hurt Mommy, honey. I just don't want to see you get hurt like your father did, she said, telling the truth. Please come out, Abby pleaded. Drew then looked up in the dark and dusty ceiling and slowly crawled out on his badly cut knees, stared at her. Oh, honey, come here, Abby then said, as Drew got up and ran to her open arms. Abby looked down at her son, bruised his head into her chest like a typical 4-year-old, and then did something that he didn't mean to do in a very long time. He cried his eyes out. Shh. It's okay. I love you. I'm here, Abby said, as she cradled her son in her arms just like when she did when he was born. That part of the day was nice for them both. Even though part of it was a total shock to Abby, she was still as happy as she could cry with her son over something that he hadn't cried in over many years. After being together and spending some time talking quietly about what's troubling him, they were both happy because they were both spending quality time, which they hadn't done in a very long time. That night, Shigo and Draken stayed in the same room and in the same bed. Draken was surprised to find a small top and small pants that fit him in his dresser, and got dressed. Shigo was laughing so hard when she shut off the lights because he was lost under the dark covers. Shigo, help me! I'm really lost! He screamed. She laughed even harder and turned the lights on. Walking over to his side of the bed, she ripped off the covers and saw little Drew on his back, smiling. You little... Shigo trailed off, starting to kiss him and laugh without noticing that she was only joking around with her. Come on, we both have a long day. Let's go to bed, she said, again, getting on her side and kissing him on the forehead as he hugged her, with his tiny arms and cuddled up next to her, as they both drifted off to sleep. The next day was sunny and the air was clean and crisp. Shigo wanted to wear her small green and black jumpsuit since she was going to see her brothers, but her lower stomach, where the baby was growing, was getting bigger each day, and it was getting smaller for her. So she decided to wear a black sweater and green dark pants. Honey, what are you wearing today? Shigo asked, as she put on some black lipstick and headed downstairs. The regular, Draken said, smiling, as he combed his black wavy hair and zipped up his pants. You wearing that again? Shigo asked, looking at what he was wearing. It was a black t-shirt with the same skull on it and his dark blue pants. Come on, let's go get breakfast. And are you ready to go? Shigo asked, picking him up and taking him downstairs. Why are you carrying me? Drew then asked, and he raised one eyebrow. Well, I thought I would get used to it since I have to carry our own child when he or she is born, Shigo said, smiling in a dreamy way. Abby had already gotten up early that morning and got dressed and made her fluffy bed. She was downstairs drinking iced tea and had a muffin as the two of them came down quietly. Morning, Mother, Draken said, as he jumped out from Shigo's protective arms and went to sit down at the table and reach for the coffees. No coffees for little boys, Shigo said as she opened the fridge and looked to see what she wanted for breakfast. His face was white and sulked. Since why I can't have coffee? I'm a grown man, for crying out loud. Draken whined as he gave her the puppy dog pout. There was a long silence till Shigo finally gave in. Yes, he said quickly, pouring himself a cup of dark, hot brown coffee. After drinking it at one gulp, he had a mustache and Shigo and Abby were laughing. I think I look scary in a mustache, Draken said, wiping away the coffee in his little pale face. I would agree to that, Abby said, joking, taking a sip of her iced tea and opening the newspaper. Shigo was stir-frying the eggs when it was done and served it to Draken, who was on his third glass of coffee and had a pity party when she took it away from him. After breakfast, Draken had told his mother that they were going to see Shigo's brothers, and he invited her to come along, which she did. Walking back down the pavement that led to the cars, Draken stopped and picked her up in a pink worm which was wiggling madly. Smiling evilly, he turned and looked at her and held the worm behind his back. Shigo helped Abby into the car and ran back up to get her fangs. Coming back down, she stopped. Aren't you getting in the car? Oh yes, the car, he said, remembering, climbing into the front seat next to Shigo, who was going to drive. Draken then quickly put the wiggling worm where Shigo sat and waited for her to come in. Ew! Shigo then screamed as she opened the door and saw it. Draken was laughing wildly, pounding his little fist on the white lever as Shigo flicked the worm away and got in. Very funny, Shigo then said as he clipped onto his seatbelt, and they drove down the graveled driveway. On the way, Shigo had kept her beady eyes on the road, with her normal scowl and breathing heavily. What's wrong? Are you okay? Draken asked, a little worried seeing her nostrils move quickly. I'm fine, Shigo said, taking a deep breath and putting her hand over her lower stomach. Shigo looked down and shook her head, then started to drive a little faster. Shigo, what's wrong? Draken said, turning towards her, knowing that something was up with her. I just don't feel good, and you know I'm never too thrilled to see my brothers, Shigo said sarcastically, rolling her diamond green eyes. Oh, Draken said, not so worried anymore. But why don't you feel good? He then asked quickly. I think it's just a baby growing. Nothing to worry about, Shigo said, smiling at him and looking at the mirror. Abby was looking out the window happily, watching the trees passing by quickly. Drew, she then said, breaking the silence. Yes, Mom? She asked, with his squeaky voice now turning around in his seat. Did you ever tell Shigo that you rode horses when you were young? No, I didn't, he said, smiling and turning around. You rode horses when you were young? Shigo asked. Yeah, we had a stable in the back field of my house. How many do we have, Mom? I think about 7. Remember America? Oh, she loved you, Abby said, smiling. Yeah, how could I forget her? Who's America? Shigo asked suspiciously. Draken and Abby laughed. America was my horse. Oh, I see. Shigo then laughed, blushing a bit. Did you ride her? Yeah, but she was old. It was weird, though. Why? Shigo asked, taking a right turn down the city street of Go. Well, America would only let me and Mom ride her, not even Kylie. Shigo then, Draken then had his voice so tender and frail. Abby's brown eyebrows went up as she heard her say her name. She wasn't surprised himself, and he had said Kylie's name. Draken had thought about her in a long time, and it always felt like a sharp pain in his chest when he thought about what happened to her that night. "Who's Kylie?" Shigo asked, more calm this time. "Kylie was my friend, the only friend I ever had," Draken said. His voice was quivering and spoken little tears welled up in his eyes, but he swept them away before no one saw. "What was she like?" Shigo asked. "Oh, she was wonderful. She would always be there for me when I get beat up by school bullies, and she always was there to protect me. Even that night when she was taken away," Draken said sadly, with his head down. Abby bit her lower lip, trying not to cry as well. That night she lost so many loved ones, and that night changed for both Draken and Abby's life forever. "Oh, I'm sorry. What happened to her, if you don't mind me asking?" Shigo said in a sympathetic tone, which was very rare for her to speak in. "The fight, my dad, that man who took her away," Draken said, as a small stream of tears flew down his face. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry if I upsetted you," Shigo then said, hugging him, and keeping an eye on the twisted road, wiping away the tears Draken had felt, ridicules, and would do anything to be back to his old body. "I'm sorry if I even brought it up," Abby then whispered, in a sad tone as she went back and to look out the window. Shigo felt embarrassed and upset for Draken, but didn't want to gain too much stress because it would hurt the baby. So she let out a deep breath and drove a little faster. Draken had rubbed his sore red eyes and looked out the window next to him. To the best he could, he hoped that they were very close to Go Tower, because all of them were starting to feel very uncomfortable, and so she drove and got closer and closer, and none of them spoke a word until they reached the Go Tower. Eventually, Shigo, Draken, and Abby reached the Go Tower. "Wow, what a nice building," Abby exclaimed, as she pulled her head up and read the word "Go," which filled the whole building. "Come on," Shigo then instructed them, and with a signal from her hands as they walked up the road to the building, Shigo put her hand on the screen and scanned it. In front of three of them, the silver sturdy doors opened wide and it made noise like steam. Shigo knew where to go, since she lived there half her whole life. The rooms were a bit chilly, and Draken raised his hand and held Shigo because he was a little frightened. Abby, on the other hand, was eye-wide, and her mouth was small. She looked up around and the strange building, in which she'd never seen before. "Oh, Miss Lipsky, this is where me and my brothers grew up," Shigo then said proudly, as they entered a very large room with a dark blue table with 2 red, a green, and a blue and a purple chair surrounding it. Making Abby jump out from the door across from them came a long slender man dressed in dark purple and black jumpsuit like his sister's. His skin was very pale but had a light tone of purple to it, but it was hard to see. His hair was also dark purple, and he had a black mask that covered his eyes and little ears. "Migo!" Shigo then squealed with excitement. Migo walked over and looked around as he dropped the clipboard he was reading and spotted Shigo. "Hey, sis, kind of scared me there for a moment." "How are you?" he asked, walking over to her and hugging her tightly. "Good, how about you? Things have been all right around here. Averes hasn't escaped lately, so that kept us happy," he said, smiling. "It's just like little Wego has gotten sick. And, oh, hello, what's your name, little boy?" Migo then asked, noticing Shigo was holding on to Draken's little pale hand. Draken himself was looking around and was very curious, but it did annoy him that his own brother-in-law didn't even recognize him. "It's me, Migo," he said in a squeaky voice. Migo then threw his head back and started to laugh as Shigo, Abby, and definitely Draken's eyebrows narrowed at him. "I'm sorry to laugh. Really, no. Who is this little boy, sis?" Migo asked, starting to see that he was annoyed. "It's Draken," Shigo growled. "Draken?" Migo then asked as his little eyes opened wide with surprise. Looking back down at the child who was in his arms, closed his eyes as he spit on Migo's shoe. "What happened to you?" Migo then asked, wiping off his shoe. Now he was getting annoyed. "Well, I found a scroll behind my bookcase in my office, and I had made a formula that would let me change my body back so I was small, and I went to see what else was behind the bookcase, and apparently the rest of the formula that could bring me back to change was all gone because of our silly dog, Komodo Puddles, destroyed it," Draken said. Migo just stood there and blinked at him. "Oh," he finally said, after an uncomfortable silence. "Anyway, we brought the scroll with us because we were wondering if you and Higo would check it out," Shigo said, rummaging through her purse. Abby then came in and sat next to them, and Migo and Abby greeted each other by shaking their hands politely. "Sure, that's not a problem. Let me go get everyone. Please have a seat," Migo said, pulling out some chairs and setting them in front of the round table. "What a nice place you have here," Abby complimented Shigo. "Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's pretty old, but they seem to make it do," she responded. "Help me, please," Draken then wailed as he was hanging off the chair. Shigo and Abby laughed as they picked the little body up and sat him down on the chair. Abby then sat next to him, but Shigo didn't sit in the chairs that Migo had brought out with them. "Where are you going to sit?" Draken asked. "In a seat. I haven't sat in a long time," Shigo said, then having a nervous but happy smile coming across her. She then walked over to one of the colorful chairs and sat down on the green one. Shigo put her feet up and smiled. "I miss this life." She even thought of some sort of power grew over her, like if she felt like the chair was vibrating. Then after a few moments of sitting and relaxing, Migo came back in the room with a tall, muscular man dressed in the same suit, but his colors were black and blue, and the youngster behind him. The young one's name was Wigo too, but his colors were ruby red and black. "Hi everyone," Higo then said, getting his sister and meeting Abby, coming over to Draken, who was kicking his feet in the chair, which was starting to annoy Higo, knelt down and raised one of his eyebrows at Dragon. "Shigo and you had your baby already?" "No, wait, it couldn't be so soon," Higo then said. "I'm not her husband, it's me, Draken," he then screamed, getting off the chair. Draken was extremely annoyed by everyone, thinking that he was Shigo's new baby. "Okay, everyone, please, I'm not Shigo's new baby. I'm her husband, for crying out loud," Draken then said, screaming and jumping up and down. "Whoa, cool, my brother-in-law is a shrimp," Wigo said jokingly. Draken then growled and then got back on his little chair and folded his arms. "So you said you have something to show me, sis?" Higo then said, putting his hands on his hips. "Yes, we do," Shigo then said, remembering why they came all the way over there in the first place. Digging through her purse, she pulled out an old and tattered scroll, handing it to Higo, who was curious, and carefully unrolled it, making sure that he didn't rip or fell apart. "What are these markings?" Higo then asked breathlessly, as his beady eyes scanned the paper. "We don't know. That's why we thought you guys might know," Shigo then responded. Higo's voice trailed off, as he walked away with the scroll underneath his arm and went down a long, dark hall. Everyone stood there and looked at each other in a confused way. "I know where he's going," Shigo then said, getting out of her car and following him. Migo and Wigo too did the same. Draken and Abby just decided to stay in the big room with chairs. Higo knew there was something on this scroll, and he could feel it in his big bones. Whenever Higo was onto something, he would try and find out what it is, because if it didn't bother him for a while. Opening the big door, Higo, Shigo, and Migo and Wigo too walked in. "Since when do you go in here?" Shigo asked in a normal tone. "Ever since you brought this scroll," he responded, keeping his eyes locked on the paper. The room they had was gone into a huge library. There was stacks and stacks of books, neatly pressed onto the holder's wall. A large red carpet with the red and silver dragon was in the middle of the room, and it took up most of the floor space. There was also a very big and old brown Earth's globe near the center corner of the room. Higo then flicked on the lights and walked over to a bookcase and scanned through the spines. Shigo yawned bored and lounged down on the brown leather sofa that was in the middle of her and pulled her out a nail file. "So how's my little brother doing?" Shigo asked after a few moments of silence. "Hey, it's okay. He's not doing great, but he's getting a little better," Migo responded to her question as he sat down on the sofa across her. "Y'all know what day's coming up in a few?" Wigo too asked, reading a comic book sitting next to Migo, who was holding up as well. "Know what?" Shigo asked, filing faster. "Father's Day," he responded happily. Then a cold breeze rushed through the room as Shigo's, Higo's, and Migo's eyes glared in the little Wego who was enjoying his comic. Well, but what's wrong? He asked cautiously. I didn't know it was coming up so fast, Shigo then said, almost a whisper. Me neither, Higo and Migo both replied at the same time. Well, yeah, not like it's a big deal or anything, Wego then said, starting to kick his little feet like Draken was doing. Not a big deal, Migo then screamed, flying off the sofa in rage. What's your problem? Wego then said, frightened and confused, as he dropped the book. How dare you say what Father's Day isn't a big deal? He then said, almost a screaming this time. Oh boy, Shigo then fought, jumping off the sofa and coming over to Migo, who was red in the face. Higo was also busy concentrating when he stopped when he was going and came along over as well. Come on, Migo, it's not that big of a deal. He doesn't know, Shigo then said in the calm voice. Not a big deal, he said, yelling and throwing his fist up. Wego too then screamed and then flew out of the room in tears. I'm going to see if he's okay, Higo then said nervously, running after the big crying child out of the room. Migo was all shaky and slugged back down on the sofa, and Shigo sat next to him. What's wrong? He asked. Migo gave her a sharp look. Don't you dare ask me what's wrong. He never knew Dad, he responded, starting to yell again. Shigo then got up with him, and then let out a deep breath, and dug her hands deep into her pockets. They were just babies, Migo, and you're right, they never did know Dad, Shigo said, sadly looking down. It's been so hard, Shigo, he said, glaring at her. I know it is. No, you don't know what I'm talking about, he said, cutting her off and making her annoyed. It's been very hard to know that you've been a villain, and now you're married to a guy who's been a villain for what? I don't even know half this man's life, and now you're pregnant with his child. I'm sure your children are going to be just the same. And, shut up, Shigo then said, walking over to him with her hands turning back into claws. First of all, the reason why I became a villain was because I was very angry, and I have always been angry ever since our parents died. Second of all, you have to stop living the past, Shigo, Migo then said, interrupting her again. Excuse me, I'm speaking, she then said, waving a finger in his pale face. Second of all, I love Draken with all my heart, and yes, he did get me pregnant. With him, I would never be able to have this child, and that I'm carrying right now. Trust me, Migo, in a few months before we were married, we were one of the hardest times of my life, so don't you ever say that you have it harder than me. Shigo then breathed heavily, with her cheeks turning red. She then stormed past him, leaving him completely speechless, with a white, upset face. Just as she was about to leave the room, he told her that he was sorry. I'm sorry, he whispered. A small tear rolled down his face. Shigo turned around slowly and couldn't believe that in the first time in her brother's life, he actually said the word sorry to her. It's okay, and I'm sorry I freaked out like that on you, Shigo then said, starting to feel bad a bit. He's dying, Migo then whispered, as Shigo reached for the glass handle on the door. Who's dying? She then asked. Confused, Migo dropped to his knees and buried his hands in his face in his hands and started to cry heavily. Shigo then felt so horrible and ran to his side, holding her little brother in her arms. Migo, forgive me, she said, rubbing her arm. He loves you so much. Migo then cried, as more crystal tears streamed down his flushed face. Who loves me? Shigo asked. And who's dying? Migo then sat up on his knees and looked deep into his sister's troubled eyes and breathed that name Shigo dreaded most. Wego 1 is dying, he said in a voice that echoed Shigo's mind, and it never stopped. Wego was the only name that ran in Shigo's mind. Her face was already naturally pale and even whiter. It had become so white that it was whiter than the stick of chalk. Her heart had felt like it had been put on a stake punched through it. Shigo then sat there and staring at the helpless little brother, who was wiping tears away from his flushed face. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She managed to whisper, as she felt tears streaming up her face. We just found out. We took him to the hospital and the doctor said that the cold is so strong and that his little heart can't take it, Migo then said, sympathetic towards his sister. Shigo then put her head down and started to cry. Migo had come over and held his crying sister in his loving arms. You guys probably should have told me when you found out. Why did you lie? She yelled, crying harder into Migo's chest. None of us wanted you to be stressed. It might hurt the baby, he whispered. Hurt the baby? Baby isn't coming for a while. He can't die. Shigo then screamed as she fiercely pushed him away. Shigo then ran out of the room and went into the big room where Draken and Abby were sitting peacefully talking about baby names. Draken had seen Shigo come running in and out of the room with her hands in her face and she was crying. Shigo, what's wrong? He asked, quickly jumping up from the chair and running up to her, but she ignored him, so Shigo decided to run upstairs and bump into Higo. Where is he? Shigo demanded. Shigo, calm down, Higo then said, holding her arms. Don't touch me, damn it! She screamed as Higo stepped back cautiously. I want to know where my baby brother is, and I want to know now, she said, inhaling deep breaths, and more tears were running down her twisted face. Higo then let out a deep breath and looked down. He was crying. I'm sorry we didn't tell you sooner, he said quietly. He is near your room, sleeping. Higo then whispered, pointing to a door. Shigo then gulped hard and slowly walked past him. Opening the door, she very sadly walked into her sick brother's bedroom. The window was open, and there was a cool breeze. In the back of the room was ruffled in bed, laid a boy with dark red hair. He had very pale skin, and his little eyes were closed. Dead, sullen, without a life, there were only words Shigo came to Shigo's broken mind as she came over to her brother's bed and sat down next to him. She was crying even more now as she looked at his limp hand and kissed it. I know you can't hear me, Wigo, but it's Shigo, she whispered. I'm sorry for all the times I've been mean to you in the past. I'm sorry I left you in the rest and became a villain. I may not show it, but I love you the most, she choked out more as heavy tears streamed down her face. If I could change the past, I would not have become who I was, and will be a hero and still be with Team Go. Please forgive me, she said sadly, as she laid her head down and cried while holding his hand. Wigo's monitor was showing that his heart rate was moving very slow. Migo and Higo and Wigo too were all downstairs, and Abby and Draken had asked what was going on. Higo, who was strong and held back his tears in front of them, told them that Wigo 1 was on his last legs. Draken felt horribly sad, and Abby felt the same. Migo had wandered up with his brothers, and Draken and Abby stayed in the back, knowing that this was a family thing. Entering the room, everything felt dead. The air was ice cold, and tears of sadness drifted in the mixture of it. Migo was crying when he saw his brother's heart monitor, and he knew he wasn't going to live anymore. Higo was crying, and so was Wigo too. Wigo would miss Wigo 1 very much, because they were twins and almost the same person. Shigo had heard them come in, but didn't look to see them. Shigo then gripped Wigo's hand more tightly, and heard the horrible sound that flashed upon and locked upon his heart monitor. Wigo's heart 1 was failing, and it was only a matter of time before he was dead. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry I wasn't there by your side when you got scared, Wigo. I love you so much, Shigo said in a panicked voice, crying heavily. I'll always be with you. She then whispered and kissed his forehead, and with that beeping at the stop when the thin line ran across the monitor, Wigo 1 was dead. The young girl with hazel eyes and red shirt with long brown hair walked down in the cream-colored pavement in silence. The breeze was starting to pick up as she started to pick up her own pace. Out of the corner of one eye, she noticed that the sun was starting to set and she got worried. The young girl started to run even faster and bump into people that she didn't even know or didn't even say sorry while she hit them. Move! She then screamed and ran into an old man, who yelled in front and fell on his butt. Watch it, you little brat! He then screamed, raising his fist in the air fiercely. The clouds were starting to get dark, and a bolt of lightning struck from the sky, and rainfall started to fall as well. I shouldn't have been so lazy, she thought to herself, as she hurried one more as she ran into the bleeding rain. Finally, the child ran down the dark alley and slammed her fists on the rusty steel door. Who is it? Cracked an old woman's voice through the rain. She was on the other side of the steel door. Obviously, it's me, Now open up, for crying out loud. It's raining skulls and bones out here, yelled the child fiercely, and brushed her soaking red-brown hair out of her eyes. A loud, creaky sound occurred, and the rusty handle on the front door circled and came open. Get in, the old woman screamed, as she pulled away from the young girl by her shirt collar fiercely. Man, Tacona, what was wrong with you? The girl said. The old scraggy woman closed her door with all half of her might. She was old, maybe around the age of 60 or 70, and she had white frizzy hair. Her eyes were gray and held old stories from the past. She was wearing an apron that was white and horrible, old and new dark red with splatter on it. Did you get it? Don't you dare speak back to me, you little twit, she screamed, as she smacked a frail child who was shivering now angrily. Yes, she hissed at the old woman. I got it. Now where is mother? She asked coldly, as she dug into her pocket and pulled out the wet, crumpled map. The old cruel woman then snatched it from the child's hands and muttered something under her breath as she walked into the room. Letting out a deep sigh, the child followed her into a horribly bloody room. On the walls hung along the short silver butcher knives. In the small glass jars with many rows deeply hidden in the cabinet were the eyes and a tongue. Do you think he'll be back? The girl asked dreamily, looking into the space and looking down on the stool, folding her hands as the old woman put the map on the table and went to wash her hands. Of course he'll be back, child. He still lives here. I could feel it in my bones, whispered the old woman in a quiet voice. Yeah, if only I back in time wouldn't marry Grandpa, but this whole thing would have never happened, and you wouldn't have given birth to him, and no one would be dead, and I wouldn't have to go stalk these poor people, the girl screamed, standing off the hood. The old woman's eyes flashed upon the girl, who was shaking in rage. Quickly her bony hands reached up and grabbed the long, shiny silver knife, and turned around and slashed the girl across her face. The child screamed as she fell to the ground. I thought I told you not to talk back to me, the woman growled in her teeth. Sitting up quickly and running over to an old dirty white pearly sink with an old rusted cracked mirror, the girl examined her wound. I hate that old crank, the woman fought angrily, as she noticed the slash was very deep and started from her ear down to her throat. I'm going up to Mom to see what she has to say about this grandma, she then screamed, pointing her slash, which was oozing out red blood. Then running out of the room and up a pair of narrow wooden old dusty stairs, she came to a black door that had nail marks across from it. On the front of the door she had the name written across from it. It was of her father. She looked at it sadly, and then kneeled down and kissed her floor and spoke his name. Come in! Then ran a voice from inside. It was sensational, mysterious, so the child slowly creaked open and stepped in. Come in, Meredith. Come see Mama. The voice then whispered. The dark figure in the middle of the room chanted. The room was very old and musky. Their huge window was to how Meredith left, and every now and then the huge gust of ice or wind or rain would come busting in. Up on top of the ceiling it was gross. It was dark, old, molding, and plus the paper was falling down. The whole room was like this except for the floor. Meredith, before stepping any further, quickly stepped out of her sandals and brushed them underneath her table with her feet. The floor was dark brown and was extremely smooth, like an ice skating rink. In at the middle of this horrid, disturbing death room, as the woman dressed in black, her skin was milk and her white pale, and was the only color in her body was the golden blonde hair. Her diamond green eyes would flash brightly every time she blinked. Around this mysterious but frightening woman were many lit silver candles. Some were ruby red, and others were midnight black, and one in a very long one was brown. Burning on top of the extremely thick and very tall brown candle held a silver flame. Meredith's eyes lit with excitement as she hurried over to the woman dressed in black and asked kindly if she would remove her veil. Carefully, we must not disturb the spirits, my dear, the woman whispered as she allowed the child to take off the black death veil. Mama! Meredith then hugged her as her mother with the diamond green eyes and the blonde hair tightly. "Oh, child, how were your day?" the woman asked as she lit more candles and listened to her child's tales. "Fine, I got you what you wanted." "Oh, you did? Oh, my child, bless you," cried the woman as she kissed the top of her girl's forehead and chanted a few magic words as something amazing happened. The long cut was made from the butcher's knife and was magically quickly healing itself. After a moment later, there was nothing left on the child's face but just a smile. "Grandma hurt me again," she muttered quietly. "What did you do?" her mother asked, like any other mother would. "Just told her off. I told her the truth, that if she never met Grandpa and her father, then none of this would happen. I talked back to her." "Have I hurt him?" Meredith then whispered quietly, deep in look into her mother's tired eyes. "You mean your father?" her mother asked, raising one of her dark eyebrows. The child just nodded and worried sadly, and then looked deep into the silver flame. "You did when you talked back to Grandma. Don't get her upset, you know, that she'll kill you if she has to. She's done it before," said the woman, firmly laughing and slightly opening a large black-brown book and flipping through the pages. "Yeah, I know," the child said, rolling her eyes. "It's good to be immortal," she then cracked a small and horrid voice. "You came up here to spec, didn't you, Mary?" she then asked kindly. "Yes, Mama, I can speak to Father." "Oh, may I, please?" cried Meredith, hugging her mother tightly as if she slowly pushed her away. "Okay," the woman then replied, letting out a deep breath, closing her tired eyes as she called out her dead husband's name into the night. "Yes, it's working!" Meredith then thought excitedly, as a new gust of wind hurried through the room, and her mother's eyes shot open. The room was dark, and the only thing that could be seen were the little flickering lights in the circle which held her mother. Her mother's eyes were open as she was in a deep trance, no longer in the crystal mysterious green that they were dead white. I can feel him, Meredith," whispered her mother. Then Meredith closed her eyes and let out a deep breath as the more air burst into the dark room. She reached for her mother's frozen hand, was ready to reconnect with her father, who lied in the pits of hell. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, please stay pretty.